Good morning. To be a little bit dramatic, research is sometimes a bit of a neglected flower in a lot of companies. So let me ask you, how many of you believe that user research is really valuable? Raise your hands. Can I tell you how exciting this is? Because 10 years ago, that would not have been that many hands. And if you're not quite there yet, come and talk to me at lunch. I'm very good at convincing people about this. Now, a lot of you raised your hands. How many of your teams actually do user research on a regular cadence? Not bad. Keep them up. If all the right decision makers in your company think it's valuable too. Couple down. How many of you, keep the hands up, have as much impact as you want with the research that you do? Okay, congratulations. He's another great person to ask questions at lunch. Most people don't feel like the research that they do has all of the impact that it ought to, given all of the effort that it takes and all of the wonderful, juicy, exciting things that they bring back from research in the field. So we know a lot about what we need to actually get research done. There's our flower. We need to be able to talk to humans. We need to be able to ethically obtain their consent. We need to be able to provide them with something to look at and find out what they think about it. Most of the time, if we're working in a for-profit industry, we're going to offer them some kind of compensation for their time and trouble. We need to bring back the evidence, and through the whole thing, we need to take care of them, we need to take care of ourselves. We can do all these things really well, in fact, without very much changing. So what do we actually need to make research matter? I wrote this first, and then I said, this is really the wrong question. Because anytime somebody shares with us an hour or half hour of their life while they're trying to do something that's important to them, that matters. It matters because it changes you, the person receiving that gift from them, and it changes them in terms of their relationship to your company. But it still may not do what we need. So let's ask the question, what do we need to do to make research a really thriving flower that's seeding itself across the organization? We need some other things. We need allies. We need to make relationships throughout the company. We need budget, although maybe we can do without it. I'll talk about that in a bit if that's a difficult thing where you are. We need people in the company to actually participate in research, and we need to come back with things that we can show have real impact on the product or the service or whatever it is we're designing. And as I was starting to think about this talk a couple of months ago, a product manager in New York named Adam Thomas tweeted this, and I thought, this is fantastic. So Adam is not a researcher, he's a product manager, but what he's casually describing here in less than 280 characters is a research practice that's thriving and valued. Let me unpack a little bit of what's here. It's a chore, but he's delivering a quarterly research report that obviously summarizes a lot of research that's happening, and his leadership team eyes light up when they see it, and that's the reward for doing it. If you are doing real, connected research on a regular cadence and sharing it with people who matter in your organization, who are going to make decisions, and they're excited to hear it because they know that it's going to help them, then you've won. And the biggest thing about this set is that you're doing real research on a regular cadence and that people around the organization know that it helps them. These are the two hardest things to achieve in that list, and the rest will follow from them if you get there. So when does research really count? The simple answer is research counts when it answers a question that people in the organization care about. One of the best tricks in the book is to find out, what do people want answered? Can you become the source of answers to questions that other people find difficult to solve? There's a couple of things that have to happen for you to become that source. You have to know what people need. You have to know who's likely to need something. They have to know that you're able and interested. So if it sounds a little bit like I'm talking about a meta user research project, I am. And like so many user research projects, if you go out and just ask the question, hey, what can research do for you? You might not get the right answer. But in almost any organization, no matter how metrics driven, no matter how tied to KPIs or how focused on OKRs, there are feelings that people have, and I'm very intentionally describing them here with words that aren't very quantifiable. If there's something strange going on in the analytics that's persistent and nobody knows what is the deal with that, you are the person who can answer that if you can do qualitative research. If people are using the product in a way that nobody expected, or if customers are coming with feedback that doesn't fit the set of things you thought they might be concerned about, you are the one who can answer those things. And all those things tie into curiosity. And curiosity is where we want to catch people. We want to find out what are they curious about. But we need people with some power. When I say power in an organization, I don't necessarily mean hierarchical executive power. So we were talking a little bit, Aaron was talking earlier this morning about the 1 designer to 11 engineers. Now often that designer has to do research as a sideline, but sometimes there are maybe a few specialist researchers around, maybe like 1 to 11 designers. So maybe we've got something like 1 designer to 100, or 1 researcher to 100, something like that, engineers. So those engineers collectively have a lot of power, and in fact, a lot of companies really want to give engineers what they need. So if you can find an engineer who is curious about research, that is a person who can do a whole lot for you and whose questions you might really want to answer. I have an engineer who joined our team recently at the courts, really nice guy, has never seen user research. And I said, well, are you interested? Do you want to come see what our work actually does? Why don't you come with us to the courthouse? We're going to talk to people who are in the waiting room. And I gave him a script, and I said, okay, I'm going to ask you to take notes while somebody else runs this the first time. And it was a script about one of the trickiest but not terribly emotional steps in the court process, where you have to prove to the court that you did something. A little bit bureaucratic. And I kind of watched him during the morning as he was doing research, and he came back and he said, I've got to tell everybody about this. I didn't know what our work was actually doing, and I've got a bunch of ideas to make it better. Now, he's not a designer, so he needed some help from designers to realize those things in a well-designed way, but guess what? He's hooked on research for life, and he's not that researcher who's always banging on about it. One of the most interesting things we found at 18F when we researched digital transformation, which I'll talk about a little bit later, was that people who are in mid-senior positions are incredibly important for influence. So these are people who are maybe senior managers, directors, maybe have a few reports, maybe are one of the top ICs. They tend to have tons of organizational connections, especially if they have been at the company for a while. And those people are often conveners. And so if you can interest any of those people in a question that they are having trouble getting answered, you are going to start finding out more people's questions, and you're going to find that you have more space for research. To do all of this, your research practice has got to be open. It can't be something that only happens inside your mysterious department. It can't be something that you talk about in strange, jargony words. And you almost have to put as much effort into communicating it as into practicing. And part of this is because, if you think about what I just said about there maybe being 1 specialist researcher by the time you got around 100 engineers, it's functioning as a new discipline almost everywhere, even though it's been around for a long time. So when I said that 10 years ago, less people would have raised their hands and thought about the value, people have been working on this, and now we're at the space where almost everyone wants to do it, but not everybody knows much about it. So if you can create opportunities for teams to ask questions about research, ask questions about their customers, and learn, it's a way to think about communities of research practice. The people who work in the discipline, if you have a research team, if you're lucky enough to have that. Then you've got your designers and researchers, product managers. Everybody who works on the product is somebody who should be part of the community of practice that knows the basics of research and knows how to practice. But then anybody who makes design decisions within your organization, whoever that might be, you really want them to have some influence on the research and to benefit from it. And you can even stretch it to say, the people who are affected by your design decisions, the customers, they are also part of the community of practice, and you can consider them in developing how your practice should be. So a few specific practical things you can do. How do you bring people inside a practice? I like to hold office hours. I like to say I will be available, whether remotely or in person, in a particular room or remotely on a particular channel. I'll be available from 10 to 12 on Fridays, Pacific time. Anybody wants to ask a question about talking to customers, come see me. It's super low impact because I can be doing whatever else unless somebody turns up. And then if it turns into a valuable 2-hour meeting where lots of people are asking questions, that's fantastic. You can do the same thing with a Slack channel. Brown bag programs, especially if your company buys lunch. Sometimes people don't have a ton to do. One of the links that I put in the references was a program for teaching people the basics of usability using origami as a way. It's just a Twitter thread, but it's something I've done probably 50 times at this point. And people, when they understand how it works, are much more likely to support it. Now, the other thing you can do, if you're well along with this, is host research sessions where people come in the back room and eat their lunch while they're observing research. A newsletter. This sounds old school. But if you're in one of those financial organizations and an older school organization, I work a lot in government, people are excited to get a lively email newsletter on Friday saying what the research team did. And Aaron actually talked a lot about wall work. And to me, this is one of the best ways to bring people in. And you'd think, well, researchers don't really have any designs, what would you put on the wall? I'll tell you a story from back in 2004 when I was working at Charles Schwab, and I was head of the experience for the broker desktop at the time. We had some number that's horrible. I don't know if it was 75 or 125, I don't remember, different websites and applications that the reps had to use to answer a phone call. And we were doing one of those projects where you bring everything into a single interface. So of course we needed to conduct a card sort. Well, this was before a lot of SaaS products and before optimal sort, and so we sent everybody 3x5 note cards and had them mail them back. And then we had to tally the thing up. This is something that computers are really good at, but there weren't a lot of programs for it, so we decided to do it. Couldn't figure out what else to do, so we stuck a bunch of giant Post-its on the wall and ruled out a great big grid, and it had several people coming in and tallying stuff on the wall. And I have never had so many vice presidents visit my area, saying, hey, what's going on over here? What are you guys up to? And I would tell them that we were trying to figure this out, and they said, well, how does that work? Well, how'd you figure out you were talking to the right people? And I told them about our sample construction. Well, what did you actually have them do? Can I see the card set? Before you knew it, we had 5 vice presidents who understood the entire study, knew how it worked, saw the mechanics of it, and were ready to support the findings because they'd been part of it. So the other thing is that research counts when people can see it with their own eyes. And one of the things that I see a lot working in mission organizations is that people have joined something or they've chosen public service as a career because they want to help someone, because they want to have a particular impact out in the world. And in organizations where research isn't much of a part of it, it's really easy to lose all contact with their customers and not be able to see, wow, I spent 2 months improving this difficult government form, but I never get to talk to people who had a better experience because that happened. That can really make your work life dragging and sad and boring and frustrating. People are way happier and better at their jobs when they can see the effect that their work has. So if you can find the people who are disconnected and reconnect them by letting them see their work, which is really what seeing research is. And the other thing is, when someone has been to the field with you, as Mina from Twig and Fish said, The data doesn't have to be explained. If someone has seen 5 people struggle to find that button, you don't have to explain how qualitative data works and how 5 people missing it out of 6 is actually kind of not a great score, and it's true that it's not statistically significant. If someone has been with you to see it, you don't have that conversation anymore. You have a better one. So you need to invite people. And whoever's curious, whoever's disconnected, also whoever you think might be influential, you should invite people who probably won't come. And it's okay, because they'll get used to the invitation as long as they're useful. But you're kind of inviting your stakeholders into a more colorful and qualitative world. And in our current tech industry, where things are so numbers-driven, it's inviting them somewhere else. You want to make really sure that you help them, that they have strong expectations for what's going to happen if I go along to the courthouse. What are we going to do there? Am I going to be embarrassed? Is it going to be weird? You think about an invitation, an actual invitation. What is it? Well, it's kind of product. If you're hosting a party, you wanted to list out the features of what the invitation needs to tell people in order for them to make a good decision about whether they want to come to the party. They need to know who it's from. They need to know what you're doing. Is it a picnic, or is it swimming, or is it black tie? Obviously, when and where is it? Is there going to be food or an open bar? Do I need to bring anything? All of that needs to be included, and you can express it in a whole bunch of different ways. Maybe a really formal wedding invitation, maybe a flyer on a bulletin board, text message. It's probably the most common type we issue these days, but this has all the elements in it, right? Hey, we're going to have a barbecue on Friday. Do you want to come by? We're probably going to start at 6. Here's what we're going to have. We're going to bring some board games. Why don't you bring some? Perfectly well-formed invitation, and you can use whatever works within your organization. But basically, you're Willy Wonka here. You are saying, come and see this world that you have never seen before. And I use the Willy Wonka analogy a lot, and people sometimes say, but things didn't go well for everyone on that particular trip. Here's the thing about Wonka, as opposed to some other inviters, he told them all the rules. Nobody had a really bad experience if they followed all the rules, and even if they broke the rules and got sent down a chocolate chute or something, at the end of the day, everyone went home with a huge truck full of chocolate, just like he promised. So you really want to design the experience of coming along on research. You want to make sure that everyone has what they need to follow the rules and do a good job. I sometimes make handouts. I sometimes do demos for people. Here's how to be a good observer. If you want to actually ask questions, here's the kind of tone of voice that we use in research. Here's how to make yourself comfortable on a long day. And giving everyone a responsibility is a really good idea. One of the best ways is to give people different roles in taking notes. So you can say to your team member, hey, Benny, I would love it if you would note all of the times that a person stumbles on a legal term. Could you just take care of that for the team? That will engage somebody who's not necessarily a researcher into the actual process of doing it. One of the things that I started to track when I worked at Bolt Peters and was head of the research practice there, I oversaw, I should say, there were lots and lots of people who did studies there, but I oversaw more than 200 of them. And across all of those, a client who got to ask a question, whether they sent it in via instant message or whether they passed a note or whether they asked it themselves, a client who got to ask a question of a participant would be 100% supporter of the results of the study. So if you can engineer that, you are making research count. Now, another way that we can make research have a bigger impact is to fit our methods to the question. You might think about methods just in terms of technically, well, what kind of study do we want to do? Do we want to conduct some kind of IA method like card sorting, interviews, diaries? I think I hit the wrong button there. Okay. Interviews, shadowing. Do we want to intercept people? How are we going to do the recruiting? But sometimes, even more than those technical user research methods, grounding it into other types of research can create a clarity and connect it to other types of data that people are used to reading. So this is one of my favorite research pictures ever. It's from 2008. It is from Bolt Peters, and we were working with a company that was developing a concept car for the 2009 auto show season. And they wanted to know, in circa 2008, so smartphones were out, but not that many of them, what do people really do with those phones in the cars? And they said, by the way, we want to have an observing team that's bicontinental. Is that okay with you? Now, the answer, if you're a consultant, is always, of course it's okay if you have the budget. And we managed to put that together. We did ride-along interviews. We broadcast to 2 continents. We managed observers across those. We took hundreds of photographs. We edited videos. And we tagged the photographs in a Flickr set with things like one hand and no hands and pets. And we were justifiably proud of all the technical stuff that we put together. But this company already had a history of research. They knew a lot of the baselines. They knew where they were. Later on, that's the General Services Administration in Washington, D.C., where my old employer is headquartered, I got asked and assigned to the question of what are the best practices for digital transformation? Yikes. How do you even answer that question? What does that mean? We started to think about, well, what should we do? Obviously, we should interview some people. I don't know. It was kind of an impossible question, and it was really important to answer, and it had already been scoped, and the interagency agreement to transfer the funds to do the work had happened. So I said, well, we're going to really have to refine the question. So we did that, and this is important. So if you get assigned a research question that says something like, what are the best practices in digital transformation? It is so fine to say that's not answerable. I can't tell you, what does best mean? What does digital transformation mean? What does practice mean? And to unpack every single one of those terms until you get to a question that you actually can devise a research method to answer. Now, what we came up with was what makes modern digital practices stick within a government entity beyond a single innovation project? Because you may or may not know this, but lots and lots of governments are excited about digital and about innovation over the last 10 years or so. And a lot of them do an innovation project and spin up a team. And a lot of times those teams spin back down when the next administration gets elected, or when some kind of policy changes, or after that project makes a really beautiful prototype and everyone's really excited about the prototype and it turns out it's going to cost more money to build the real thing. So we decided to look specifically at what factors could cause innovation to stick rather than just what are the best practices. And one of the first things we decided to do was go looking for what happened when this transformation happened in the commercial world. Because if you were alive around the turn of the century, everybody did not have this all figured out yet. And there were lots and lots of stories of how companies were trying to internetify or transform into new digital age companies. Sure enough, we found some interesting stories. I don't know if anyone remembers this one from Christmas 1999, when Toys R Us finally had spun up a really nice website and taken online orders, and they could not fulfill orders on Christmas Day. And there were a lot of mad parents and kids out in the country. And it was a national scandal. It led to lawsuits. And we brought this back as part of our reporting about digital transformation, partly to say, this has happened before. Healthcare.gov is not the first big digital scandal that ever happened in the United States of America. And people learned how to get past it, and we should learn from them. This is a valid kind of research to do as part of a study where your work is to answer a question. It's okay if you're not directly interviewing people. Of course, we did that too. And we came up with, in fact, a couple of the questions I just mentioned. What the heck does digital transformation mean to you? We asked every single person. And we wanted to know, how do you know if you're done? Is that even a thing? We talked about obstacles. We talked about what might create change. And this ended up being a pretty good set of interview questions. And then we did something else. We said, who else in your organization had an important role in whether this moved forward or not? And we tried to recruit, after we stumbled into it, honestly, the first couple of times, we tried to recruit 3 people at different levels of an organization who were around at the same time for a particular project. Offered a much more complete picture if you could get one, a person who was at the individual contributor level and a person who was at that kind of mid-senior level that I was just talking about. And then if that person would introduce you to one of the executives who maybe decided on the budget for it, and who maybe had to decide to kill it if it got killed, and who maybe took the hit if it failed. That gave us a much more complete picture. And we'd heard of snowball recruiting, which is a somewhat common technique where you ask for introductions, but not this exact thing, so we decided to give it a name. We called it cluster recruiting. But this meant that the research methods that we were using at this point, we did moderated interviews with about 20 or 25 people. We did a literature review. We did a policy and regulation review, which is a fun thing you get to do in the government. I'm not joking. It's actually really fun to do things like go and read the Paperwork Reduction Act and find out what it actually says. We did this cluster recruiting, and for this one in particular, because it fit the study, we had to have really tight consent and confidentiality about what we would do. If you are a CIO in a major state government agency whose agency has failed at a project that cost $300 million, in order to speak to a researcher, you need some really tight practices. And so we worked on our consent forms for weeks. We kept our transcripts in a very special drive where nobody else could see the raw data. We disassociated the names of the people from the transcripts entirely. We changed the names of states, just to make really sure that everybody had what they needed. And this mixed method study ended up being so much more valuable than just a set of interviews. There's a really nice new book about this, by the way, by a researcher named Sam Ladner. It's called Mixed Methods. I believe it's in your links. Well, the other thing is doing it wrong. Doing it wrong is a really valuable skill to have. If you cut the right corners at the right time, you can be one of the fastest and cheapest things in the company. Do you need a really large Airtable seat license and a lab with a lot of cameras and a team of 5 to do good research? You do not. Please don't feel discouraged if you don't have those things. I will go out and do a half-day research study with exactly what you see on this screen, which is basically a laptop, a notebook, my consent forms, and my phone to take photos, and $20 to buy people coffee at the coffee shop if it's a general audience study. You can also do some really nice things with the way that you script for a bare bones study. So you can set up something that is effectively both a script and a score sheet. And you can do the same things you would otherwise do, like labeling your assumptions on it. So what we have here, we have your top question, which is, why are you here today? So we're looking at an example that's about getting a building permit, which, is anybody a homeowner? You ever tried to get a permit for a remodel? Okay. So tell me why you're here at the counter today. Is it your first time being here? You've been here more than 3 times. And we sort of realize that there's an assumption in here that 3 is a frustration threshold. That's fine. Assumptions are great. Just write them down and know that you have them. Note that I had 2 choices on here. Assuming everybody would be a homeowner or a contractor, that might not be the case, so we need to write that down too. And we're looking at, we assume everybody thinks this is hard, which can sometimes bias your research. We probably have some preliminary data that there are complaints or we've heard frustrations, but you don't want to over-lean onto that. Now the thing about this is a half sheet that can effectively take notes for a 20-minute research session, and that is really easy to collate with other research sessions on which you use the same instrument to take notes. After every single interview or shadow or whatever type of session you do, write down a 1-sentence description of the person. So Tallish African-American guy in a nice suit. Friendly. Great, you're good. White woman with 2 children in a stroller and a big bag. Great, you're good. Just a simple thing. It's not to characterize anybody so much as it is just to give you a hook. Oh yeah, I talked to that person. I remember that person. It helps you remember the conversation. Always write down the number one thing that surprised you. It's very, very rare to have a research conversation where there isn't a single surprise. And that surprise is potentially the key to what's most important to learn from that session. And then just a quick summary of 2 or 3 things they said. And if you go out and you do a few of these in a day, maybe you have a big team and you fan out and you do 20, but you all make these notes, you'll have an easy way to get into extracting what you need from it. So the most important thing is that research counts when we can tell the story really well. So I said earlier that this is a meta-user research project, by understanding what your organization needs from research. I am not the first person to say this, and I doubt if Larissa is either, but I have heard her say it. So what do you need to tell the story, and what's the way that they are going to receive the story of the study? In the first place, when researchers come out to design conferences, people spend a lot of time, and this is on us, talking about how to collect qualitative data, how to do interviews, how to conduct card sorting, how to use all these methods. We talk a lot less about how to synthesize all that data, and honestly, I think that is dumb of us, because really the most important thing is getting the interpretation out of the data. So when we speak of stories, the first place that stories are going to happen is when the team gets together after they come out of the field or after they come out of the lab. You're going to tell stories to each other. And so everyone who was there, all the people that you invited and were able to get to come along, all those people need to participate. And it's really important to think about yourself as a facilitator of this session. Erin talked a little bit about facilitating design reviews earlier. Facilitating a research synthesis has a certain amount in common. We want to state our goals, just like you do for a design review, but we're much more there as equals. We're not looking at one person's design. We're sharing everything that we all collectively captured from our interactions with a bunch of humans out in the wild. A couple of really nice ways to do that. This is a fun law, if you will, from a guy named George Miller at Princeton. He's a psychologist. And he says, in order to understand what another person is saying, you have to assume that it's true and try to imagine basically what would have to be true if what this person was saying was real. So if someone is saying, "This is the worst thing I've ever seen," still your reaction, if it was something you created, think about what would have to be true. And probably your first instinct, which is, well, they just haven't seen a lot of things that are very bad, is not the right one. The one that you want to go with is, why is this so important that they're having such a strong reaction to it? Let's think about what could be true and what I can learn from that. You're good at this already, right? We all work in metaphors almost without thinking about it. We all name our emotions. We all extract, even if we're only on audio with someone, what kind of emotion they're having. And this is making it a little bit more explicit than we usually do, which is a little bit less comfortable, which is why we have little rubrics like this. It says, somebody said something. Okay, before we go and react to it, let's assume it's true and think about the world in which it could be true, especially if they use a metaphor, which is one of the most valuable things we can get from a user research session. Somebody says, for example, on a news study a few years ago, we had a lot of people talk about the news as gems. And that's kind of an interesting term for value. So if these really were gems, what would have to be true? Well, we'd expect that people would do certain things with them. Like gems are valuable things that you exchange for other things, or that you hoard maybe, or that you display to show off. And those motivations that we picked up from this one metaphor helped us construct a whole set of personas that was really rich and variable. Many other things went into that as well, but just asking this question. Another one, raise your hand if you ever used the 5 whys, where you act like a kindergartner and you say, Why did you click on that? Oh, it looked like an escape route. Well, why did you want to escape? Well, I thought I was about to get into a purchase page. Well, why would that be bad? Well, I don't want to buy anything here. And so forth. I like a variation on that, which is the 5 ways. So if people talk about or describe something 5 different ways, it's virtually certain that one of the things they come up with is going to be an apt metaphor. It's going to be a really useful description that you might be able to hang a product spec or a design value or some one of those key high-level pieces around. So what I've added to my researcher stereotypical repertoire of, can you tell me a little more about that? Is just, can you say that another way? And I use this all the time with the team in synthesis conversations too, and we do it to each other. So if somebody says something that you're not quite sure of, they might be getting at something pretty important that's back in their mind. Again, we're working with those things like oddity or strangeness or very human values that our pre-linguistic faculties are processing. And so we are working together to kind of exteriorize them into language so that we can then turn them into specs and into products and into real things in the world that we design. So asking your colleagues in synthesis, can you say that another way? Will get all of you forward to the right language that you'll be able to unite around and make that next thing. Again, I don't think every researcher likes to admit this, but I was really glad when Paul said this out loud at a conference last year. You have to spend about as much time communicating outcomes as you did on executing the research work. All the surrounding work, figuring out the question, understanding who's interested, preparing them, recruiting, all of that. When you get to the end, finding the story and telling it should get as much of your effort. We try to make this a little bit easier, at least. You remember about tracking, all those little things that you write down after every interview. Well, at the end of every day, if you've got email or Slack or something in your organization, today we talked to 8 customers. And the most interesting thing that we saw, and it's important that it's the most interesting, it's like the most compelling, the most different from the numbers that you're used to seeing. Here's what we saw, and then here's the themes that are emerging, or maybe some that are fading, and here's how we're going to pursue this tomorrow. And at the end of every study, by whatever means works, we talked with this many people total. Remember that question we all wanted to answer together? This is the story of what we learned together. And here's what we need to do now. This can take all kinds of forms. Show you an example of wall work telling a story in a moment. Giant PDF reports. Working in government, I have had some of my biggest wins from that, even though it is a somewhat disfavored deliverable at this point. Edited video is one of my favorites. When working on commercial products, if I see customers get frustrated and start to swear, I will make a reel of every time someone said a bad word and present that as part of the presentation so that people can see the level of emotion that's happening around a challenge with the product. I've also had a huge win from editing a recording from the call center that showed the representative's screen as they were helping a customer and the difficulty that the representative had working with the internal systems. Shipped that one to an EVP with a nice note and the approval of all the people in the chain in between, and we ended up with a multi-million-dollar funding package. So we can also communicate, of course, through beautifully written backlog tickets and all the design artifacts you might think about, personas, scenarios, wireframes, sketches. We can communicate through prototypes, too. Sometimes I'll just whip up something and say, what if we tried something like this? All these ways to tell a story. I do want to shout out our most admired government designers in this world, which is the Government Digital Service in the UK, and the way that they use walls. If you ever have the opportunity to visit their office, it's a real privilege, and every single wall is covered with research work. And it's colorful, it's bright, it's very clear in a lot of cases. I'm not sure you can see it in a single slide, but you can't walk around their office without knowing what the research team is finding out about, say, what's it like to be the parent of a young child in the UK? What's it like to move from somewhere else to London? What's it like to be trying to visit someone in your family who's incarcerated? All of those things are up on the walls for everyone to see. So the single best case you can make for research is an illuminating story, and I wanted to tell you just at least one story. So last fall, researching in Bakersfield, which is an inland California city that's extremely diverse and sort of at an urban-rural nexus, I met a youngish man in the waiting room. And he was wearing work boots and a work shirt, and he'd taken time off. And he was holding a bunch of papers, and he was kind of shaking. So I hesitated a little bit to approach him, but I went up and I asked him if he would talk to a researcher for a few minutes, and he said yes, and he kept just shaking a little bit. And I asked him to tell me why he was at court. It was about a child custody matter. Pretty common thing, happens to people all the time. And we started talking a little bit. I was interested because he was holding papers if he would have tried to do something using his phone or a computer. Turns out he doesn't use a laptop, but he's really fast and easy with his phone. But he said, no, you know what, technology doesn't scare me. But I'm shaking because I'm so scared I'm gonna mess up this paperwork. And if I mess up this paperwork, I could lose my kid. And it's terrifying. And then, I asked him about what we might be able to do to help him, and he said, honestly, I don't know, I'd pay 50 or 60, I'd pay $100 for someone just to tell me whether I'm getting this right. Now, $100 is a chunk of change for an ordinary person, of course. It's not a third of what you need to pay for an hour of a lawyer's time in California. And he kept just shaking and experiencing this. There was no particular help I could give him at the time. He was in the right place to get a little bit of help reviewing his forms, but this became the core story of the research report that we delivered to leadership of the courts, to say, this is exactly an average Californian coming to their court to get assistance, and this is what the experience is like. And that, more than anything else that was in the report, which was quite lengthy, started to get people to think about, how do we actually want to design the experience of a regular person who can't afford a lawyer in our courts in the state of California? So, I've talked about lots of party invitations and compelling stories, but the reality is sometimes you do have to fight. Of course you should be nice, but all the things I talked about before, I can't promise you they will work right away every time. This stuff is new, and it's kind of scary, and it's still worth doing, and I personally favor somewhat sneaky tactics in the fight. So why don't people want to do research? Right? It takes too long, nobody has time. Several speakers have mentioned that Agile does not fit design processes very well. I hear this one all the time. Here's the thing. You can do a really solid research study in 3 days exactly like this. Your first day, create the thing you're going to test, write your short little scripts and score sheets, and pick up some incentives, which can mostly be small. Unless you are a really giant, profitable company, people don't expect huge incentives. Day 2, if you know where your users are, go out there, intercept them, let them see what you have, understand how they react to your product. In the morning of day 3, facilitate a synthesis session with everyone who participated in the research. In the afternoon of day 3, host show and tell. 3 days is in some ways more time than it used to be. It sounds like a lot of time in the course of a sprint, but it isn't that much time. I believe that most people can get a hold of this much time, can beg or borrow from another project or sneak off and steal it and get that first set of research done to get that compelling story that will make people understand why it matters. What about when they won't let you talk to customers? This is another one I hear all the time. So there are a lot of ways to do research, and I love to hold out for the gold standard, and I told you earlier, I'm also a big fan of doing it wrong when you have to. So this is my chart of reliability of research participants, starting with unreliable and going to completely reliable. You really shouldn't do research with your team members, even in an emergency, but you might be able to make it work with friends who are not on your team if it's really difficult to get other people and if you acknowledge what the pitfalls of that might be. Target customers are pretty good. Real customers with recent experience are really good. Real users with current needs, ACEs, and if you can get people who have the need this hour, that is the best thing you can get. A number of years ago, we were doing a remote phone study for a company that had a laptop configurator on their site, and I remember the date of the study. It was April 12th, and in a minute you'll see why. It was one of the people that we happened to web intercept was a tax accountant whose laptop had died on April 12th. And watching her go through the process of configuring the new laptop that she needed overnight shipped for tomorrow was the most instructive thing the team had ever seen about the interface of that configurator. So if you have the opportunity to get people who are in that situation, that is amazing. If you can't openly contact customers, this happens to a lot of government agencies, you have to think really creatively about what research can you do in the sector, or are there groups of employees like call center folks who have close contact with customers and can stand in? Where do people go when they have a need for your product? And one of the things I always address is people don't want their logo on a study. What can you do? There are great companies that make cheap stickers and cheap business cards, and you can make one for your study and get it shipped to you inside of a week. So you can have a study about, vacuum cleaner usability, if you don't want to reveal who you work for. And some researchers feel very comfortable using their personal social media to recruit participants. I use my Twitter, I don't use my Facebook. Everybody makes their own decisions, but that is something that you can potentially consider as a patch. Now, what is the exact ROI of a research study in dollars? It's really hard to calculate, and I'm not going to give you a method to calculate it, but I will say that if you can get your hands on $200, you can do some valuable research. So what you do is you go buy 6 $10 Starbucks cards for your 6 participants. You maybe spend $40 on equipment like, clipboards, backup chargers, thumb drives, whatever you need to make the study a success. And then you go get those cards or stickers, and you spend the rest on parking and taxis and getting to the participants and making sure the team is comfortable. You can do a one-day study with this kind of budget, and I have never heard of a director in a commercial company who didn't have $200 signing authority with 0 oversight. So it is a possible amount of money to get for almost everybody in this room to do a study if you have trouble getting it approved. And the thing is, if you are small and cheap, people stop asking about the specific ROI and start looking towards the positive value of what you did. If you came back with a compelling story, they actually probably would have been happy for you to spend thousands of dollars, even if they wouldn't approve that up front. Has anybody gotten this one before? Yeah. So here's the thing. What we talked about, the emotional pieces, the instinct pieces, research stands on its own when we lean into what it's good at, that statistics isn't. You can explain all these strange little phenomena that people think are mysteries. Statistics can't do all that. The other thing to say is that behavioral patterns repeat over much smaller samples than opinion patterns. So you definitely need a few thousand people if you're doing election polling. But if you have somewhere between 5 and 20 for behavioral research, you will find what you were looking for. And I can tell you that I have done so many studies where someone insisted on booking 30 sessions. And by session number 13, they were like, yeah, okay. We got it. This is the same as all the others. We understand. So something else that I heard when I asked about what people wanted to know was it gets pushed down to interns. And I hope it's clear, after everything we've talked about today, that the intern does not have the organizational power to deliver these findings. And so it's great. If you want to help the intern do this, they will find it a valuable skill through their whole career. But they are not the person who can help the organization understand how to act on this, or who has the power to make all the connections to actually deliver the findings. If research is about making space for people to participate in refining questions and leading conversations, those are senior skills. So it's not fair to ask interns to do that. Forget the buts. You can always do some kind of research. So, last few arguments to dispel. No one's interested. I know. It's not ever really true that no one's interested. There is someone in customer service who has a close connection to users and wants to bring the stories to the rest of the company. There is a curious engineer. There are probably 5 curious engineers, and they're going to be really fun to take on a study. Put your questions up on the wall. Record a pain point video and ship it to a bunch of executives. Make a little bit of good trouble inside the company. You can get through the no budget thing with a $200 research plan. You can consider going all the way down to just buying people cups of coffee instead of incentives. Sometimes it's okay to patch the gaps with personal equipment if you have a nice phone you can use as a recorder. It's really nice if you don't have incentive budget to try to get t-shirts or business cards, things like that to look legit. It's okay. And finally, one of the other things that I put into the reading list was this article from a few years ago by Atul Gawande, who's famous for the book, The Checklist Revolution. And he is talking in this little quote about an initiative to improve midwifery in rural Indian hospitals by sending licensed nurses from the cities out into the country to help the nurses who run these hospitals. And the initiative ran into a lot of trouble at the beginning. People didn't want to do the new practices that the city nurses were suggesting, but eventually they started to. And he called one of the nurses from the rural hospitals and asked, "Why did you end up changing your practice?" And the best she could come up with was, the city nurse was nice. She was nice. She smiled a lot. We talked about our kids. She wasn't judgmental. She didn't tell me I was wrong. And the thrust of this whole article is that basically the most effective thing in changing practice is an army of friendly people who can sit next to the people who have older practices and show them the new practices without being judgmental. And so that is really why the dandelion has been the official flower of this presentation. Research is something that needs to cast seeds really widely, and it's also something, if you are a gardener or a lawn owner, that once it gets out there is very hard to dig out and root out of an organization. You can't put research back in the bottle, but you can make it count. And I think I have managed to leave a few minutes for questions.